The moment I saw my son's name on my phone screen, I almost didn't answer. Not because I was busy, not because I was tired, but because somewhere deep in my chest, in a place I had been ignoring for 3 years, I already knew what he was going to say. I answered anyway. That was the last mistake I made for a very long time. But the truth about what happened between us is simpler than you might expect. And it started long before that phone call. My name is Robert. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county. Got up early every morning, came home late most nights, and put every dollar I didn't spend into a savings account I thought would give me a quiet, comfortable retirement. My wife, Carol, passed away 9 years ago from a stroke. She was 58. She never got to see the retirement we planned. She never got to sit on the back porch of the house we always talked about buying in North Carolina, the one near the mountains where the air smells like pine and the summers aren't brutal. She never got any of the things we saved for. After she passed, I kept saving anyway. I didn't know what else to do with myself. Work helped. And then my son got married. And I thought maybe this is what the money is for now. Maybe this is how I stay connected to something that matters. His name is my son. I'll call him that because that's what he was to me, my son. His wife, I'll call my daughter-in-law. They got married 6 years ago. Big wedding. I paid for most of it, about $40,000. Because they asked and because I said yes and because I believed in those days that money was a way of showing love. They had 2 children. My grandson, who is now 9 years old, and my granddaughter, who is 6. My grandson is the kind of kid who still thinks I'm interesting. He asks me how bridges work. He sits next to me on the couch and leans against my arm without being told to. He calls me just to tell me something funny that happened at school. He is the only reason I drove to that house every Sunday for 3 years, even when I didn't feel welcome. My granddaughter is sweet, but she's young. She mostly follows her mother's lead on things, including, eventually, on how to treat me. Now let me tell you what my son and my daughter-in-law were doing with their lives while I was sitting in my house 40 minutes away managing a spreadsheet I never told them about. My son works in pharmaceutical sales. He makes good money. His base salary when this story begins was around $90,000 a year, and with commissions, some years it was closer to $115,000. My daughter-in-law had a part-time job at a marketing firm she'd worked at for years, maybe 25 hours a week, bringing in around $32,000 a year. Together, they were making somewhere between $120,000 and $145,000 annually. That is not a family that needs help. And yet, the first thing I paid for was the down payment on their house. $312,000 house in a good suburb, nice school district, 2-car garage. They asked for help with the down payment, $60,000. I said yes. I told myself it was an investment in their stability, in my grandchildren's future. Then came the car. My son's lease ran out and he wanted to buy something newer. Could I help with that? Just a loan, he said. We'll pay you back. $22,000. I said yes. The car loan became a gift after 6 months when the payments stopped, and neither of us mentioned it. Then there was the credit card. My son had one credit card that he'd let get out of control, about $14,000 in debt at a high interest rate. It was stressing him out, he said. Could I just clear it so they could start fresh? I said yes. I told myself it was the last time. It wasn't. I became, without ever being asked directly or agreeing to it formally, the financial foundation underneath their life. I was paying their car insurance, both cars. I was paying for my grandchildren's after-school programs, the soccer registration, the gymnastics, the art class my granddaughter liked. I was paying for the lawn service because my daughter-in-law said my son worked too hard to spend weekends mowing. I had a recurring payment set up to help with their mortgage every month. $1,200. Every month, for almost 2 years. By the time I sat down one evening in February and went through every single payment I was making on their behalf, I counted 41 separate recurring transactions. Some were small, some were not. Together, they added up to $3,800 a month, leaving my accounts and going directly into their life. I want you to understand that I am not a wealthy man. I am a retired civil engineer with a pension, a social security check, and savings I built carefully over decades. $3,800 a month was more than half of what I brought in. I was not funding their life from abundance. I was funding their life by steadily draining my own. But here is the thing I haven't told you yet. The thing that took me longest to admit to myself. They knew. They knew exactly how much I was contributing. Because I had told them, more than once, when the conversation about money came up, I had been transparent, thinking transparency was the same as honesty, and that honesty would be respected. What I did not understand is that when you tell people exactly how much you're giving them, and they keep asking for more, they have made a calculation about you. They have decided that you will say yes, and they are usually right, because by then, you have trained them. The call I almost didn't answer came on a Tuesday evening in March. My son's voice was careful. He had what I call his conversation voice, not his regular voice, not the easy way he talks when we're watching a game or he needs something, but the voice he uses when he's about to say something he's rehearsed. He said he and my daughter-in-law had been talking. He said they were concerned about me. He said they had noticed that I seemed to be spending a lot on myself lately. A trip I had taken to see my brother in Arizona, a new television I had bought for my bedroom, a meal out I had mentioned in passing. He said, and I am going to quote this as exactly as I can remember it, "Dad, we just feel like maybe you shouldn't be living quite so large when the rest of us are trying to budget." I sat very still. He kept going. He said they were trying to be responsible. He said they were thinking about their future. He said they worried that I was spending money carelessly and that it might affect, and here he paused just a moment, what's available down the road. He said they thought maybe I should think about tightening up a little, living more simply. When he finished, I said I appreciated him sharing that. I told him I'd think about it, and I got off the phone and sat in my kitchen for a very long time without moving. My son, who I had given $60,000 to for a down payment, whose car I owned most of, whose children's activities I was funding in full, whose mortgage I was supplementing every single month, my son had just called me to say I was living too comfortably. The vacation he mentioned, the one to see my brother in Arizona, had cost me $1,100, including the flight, 3 nights in a mid-range hotel, and dinners. $1,100. I hadn't taken a trip in 2 years before that. The television was $412. The meal out was at a diner where I had the chicken fried steak and a slice of pie, and I left a good tip because the waitress was kind, and the whole thing was $31. I sat in that kitchen and I asked myself something I should have asked years earlier. When did being generous stop being enough? When did it become something they felt entitled to manage? I did not make any decisions that night. That is one thing I want to tell you clearly. I did not act out of anger. I am 67 years old and I have learned, slowly and at real cost, that decisions made in the heat of feeling are almost never the right ones. I went to bed. I slept badly. I got up the next morning and I made coffee and I took out a legal pad, a real yellow legal pad, the kind I used at work for 30 years, and I wrote down everything. Every payment. Every amount. Every date it started. How many months I had been making it. The total, in one number, of what I had given or was still giving. When I added it all up, not just the recurring monthly payments but the lump sums over the years, the number was $319,000. Over 6 years, $319,000 had moved from my savings and my income into their life. I stared at that number for a long time. I thought about Carol. I thought about the retirement we planned. I thought about the fact that I had been eating oatmeal for breakfast most mornings for the past year because it was inexpensive and easy, and I had been telling myself it was because I liked it. I thought about the North Carolina house. I thought about the pine trees and the mountain air, and how I had stopped checking real estate listings in that area sometime around the 2nd year I was helping with their mortgage because I had quietly accepted that it wasn't going to happen. I thought about my grandson, who had called me 2 weeks earlier just to tell me a joke about dinosaurs. A 9-year-old who called his grandfather to tell him a joke. Not to ask for anything, just to tell me a joke. And then I thought about my son's voice on the phone. Careful. Rehearsed. We just feel like maybe you shouldn't be living quite so large. Here is something I understood in that moment. Sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. You cannot love someone out of entitlement. You can give and give and give, And if the other person has decided that your giving is simply the baseline, the floor of what you owe them, then more giving will not change that belief. It will only confirm it. The only thing that will interrupt that belief is reality. And the only person who could introduce reality into this situation was me. I did not call my son. I did not send an email. I did not have a conversation where I explained myself and gave them a chance to talk me out of it, or cry, or apologize temporarily and then go back to normal within 3 weeks. I had done that 3 times in smaller ways. I had brought up my concerns about the financial arrangement, and each time we had a difficult conversation that ended with my son saying he understood, and my daughter-in-law being quiet in a way that told me she was angry, and then nothing changing. I called my bank. I called my bank on a Thursday morning, and I spent 2 hours on the phone canceling or rerouting every recurring payment connected to their life. The car insurance, the after-school programs, the lawn service, the monthly mortgage supplement, all of it. I set the cancellation date for 30 days out because I am not a cruel person, and 30 days is enough time to make adjustments if you are paying attention. Then I called my attorney, a woman I had worked with twice before. Once when Carol passed, once when I updated my will 3 years ago. I made an appointment. I want to tell you about my grandson, because he is the part of this story that I think about most, even now. A week after I made those phone calls, my grandson called me again. He had a school project about a local landmark, a bridge, actually, which made me laugh, and he wanted to know how bridges were built. We talked for 45 minutes. I explained tension and compression, the way forces move through a structure, why an arch works. He kept asking questions, real questions, not polite ones. At the end, he said, "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to build things too." I told him I thought he would be very good at it. I did not tell him what I had done or what was coming. He is 9 years old and none of this is his to carry. What I did do, when I met with my attorney, was update my will. I had already been considering this for some time, for reasons I had been honest with myself about even when I was still making all the payments. My son and my daughter-in-law were not good stewards of money. That was simply a fact I had been pretending wasn't a fact. Giving either of them a significant inheritance would not help them. It would be consumed. My grandson, at 9, is already a different kind of person. I set up a trust for him, structured to pay out for education, and again when he turns 25, old enough to have some sense of who he is. My attorney helped me make sure it was solid. I'm not going to tell you that what happened next was easy or clean. It was not. It was a Saturday, exactly 32 days after I made the phone calls. My son called me in the morning. His voice was not careful this time. It was loud. The lawn service had sent a notice that the account was closed. The car insurance had sent a notice. The after-school program had called my daughter-in-law about a missed payment. He wanted to know what was going on. He said there must be a mistake. He said they were embarrassed. He said my granddaughter had been pulled from gymnastics temporarily because the registration payment didn't go through. I said it wasn't a mistake. I told him I had been thinking about his advice. I told him I had decided he was right, that I should probably think more carefully about how I was spending money and make sure I was being responsible for my own future. I told him that after reviewing my finances, I realized I had been overextended and needed to make some adjustments. I said all of this in a calm voice because I had practiced saying it. There was a silence. Then he said, You're not talking about stopping the payments." I said I had already stopped them. He started to get loud again, and I said, quietly, that I loved him and that I was confident that on a combined household income of over $120,000 a year, they would be fine. I reminded him that the down payment on the house was a gift and that the equity they had built there was substantial. I reminded him that his children were healthy and in school, and that the things I had been paying for were extras, not necessities. And then I said something I want to say exactly right. I said, "Son, I spent 30 years getting up every morning so you could have opportunities. I am proud of who you became in your career. You earn good money, and you are capable of taking care of your family. I'm going to let you do that now." He hung up. My daughter-in-law called an hour later. That conversation was shorter and considerably louder on her end. She said I was being selfish. She said I was abandoning my grandchildren. She said this was what she had always known about me, that when it counted I would let them down, that Carol would be ashamed of me. She said she had always known I didn't actually care about their family. I let her finish. Then I said, I have given $319,000 to your household over 6 years. You called me last month to tell me I was living too comfortably. I think this conversation is over. I hung up. They called back multiple times over the next week. My son's messages ranged from angry to apologetic and back again. My daughter-in-law did not leave messages. My grandson called me 4 days later. Not about any of this. He had finished his bridge project and gotten a good grade and wanted to tell me. I talked to him for 20 minutes, and I did not bring up his parents, and he did not bring up his parents. He told me his teacher had shown the whole class his project, and that one of his friends said it was the best one. I told him I was proud of him. I meant it completely. 3 weeks later, my son came to my house. Alone, without my daughter-in-law. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with my legal pad and my cold coffee, and he looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. I recognized that look. I had worn it myself for months after Carol died, that look of someone whose life has been rearranged without their permission. He asked me why I hadn't said anything. He asked why I hadn't told him how bad it had gotten, how much I was spending, that I was struggling. He said if he had known, he would have said something sooner. I looked at my son for a moment before I answered. He was 41 years old, sitting in the house he grew up in, asking me why I hadn't told him what he already knew. I said, I did tell you. I told you 3 times, and you told me last month that I was living too large. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he was sorry. He said he hadn't realized how much it had added up to. He said my daughter-in-law had been the one pushing for some of the bigger things, and he hadn't asked enough questions. He said he was sorry. Again, I believed that he was sorry. I want to be clear about that. My son is not a bad man. He is a man who let himself become comfortable in a situation that was wrong, and who stopped asking questions because the answers would have required him to do something difficult. That is a failure, but it is a very human failure. And I recognized in him something I had also done, the willingness to keep a convenient fiction alive because the truth is uncomfortable. I told him I loved him. I told him I had not done any of this to hurt him. I told him I had done it because I had looked at a number on a legal pad and understood that if I didn't do something, I was going to be 75 years old, alone, and unable to take care of myself, and that no one was going to step in to fix that. I told him I had been funding a life I was not living, while the life I actually wanted, quiet, mine, the one Carol and I planned, had been sitting untouched, like a house no one opens the windows in. He nodded. We didn't fix everything that day. Relationships don't work like financial transactions, where you zero out an account and start fresh. There are months of careful, tentative dinners ahead. There are conversations I expect to have with my daughter-in-law that I am not looking forward to. There are probably years of rebuilding something that was bent for a long time. But here is what happened last Tuesday. I pulled up a real estate listing for a small house outside Asheville, North Carolina. 2 bedrooms, a porch, trees visible from the kitchen window. Asking price within my range. Now that my range has stopped hemorrhaging quietly into someone else's comfort. I forwarded the listing to my attorney and asked her to look into a few things for me. Then I called my grandson to tell him about it. I told him it had a yard, and that when he came to visit in the summers we could build something. A birdhouse, maybe, or a small bridge, just for practice. He said, "A bridge? In a yard?" I said, "Why not? Engineers build for the sake of building sometimes, just to understand the thing." He thought about that for a second, and then he said, "Okay, but can we also get a dog?" I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that starts in your chest and comes out before you decide to let it. I hadn't laughed that way in longer than I could remember. I told him I was seriously considering it. I have spent most of my adult life making sure the people around me were stable, comfortable, taken care of. I built structures for a living, and I tried to build structures at home too. Financial ones, emotional ones that would hold the people I loved up above the waterline. What I understood too late, and now understand completely, is that a structure that runs only in one direction, that holds others up while quietly cracking at its own base, is not an act of love. It is an engineering failure. It will collapse eventually. The only question is when and who gets to choose the terms. I chose the terms. There is a photograph of Carol on the bookshelf in my living room, taken the summer before she got sick. She is standing in front of a fence somewhere in Vermont. We had been on a road trip, and she is squinting a little against the sun and laughing at something I said. She was wearing a blue sweater, and her hair was starting to go silver, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I look at that photograph sometimes and I think, I am finally going where we always said we'd go. I am going a little late, and I am going alone, but I am going. And somewhere in Asheville, there is a porch that will look very good in the mornings with a cup of coffee, and there is a yard where a 9-year-old boy is going to want to build a bridge just to see if he can. I think that is enough. I think, at 67, after everything, that is more than enough.